Why does Signora keeps popping up everywhere we go? Mondstadt, Liyue, and now even in Inazuma. It's great to see her since she's a cool character, or should I say a hot evil character, but why? The answer is simple: revenge. To explain my theory, I will dive into her backstory and inspirations used to create this character. But it doesn't end there. I believe this revenge that she is seeking could cause her own death. First off, why is Signora seeking revenge? Let's start off by explaining why she seems so upset. The backstory of Signora is detailed in several locations within the game, most prominently the Crimson Witch of Flames, the Pale Flame, and the Defender's Will artifacts. We can also find more hints in Venti's best-in-slot weapon, the Elegy for the End. Long story short, 500 years ago in Teyvat, there was a maiden in Mondstadt. She ends up falling in mutual love with the renowned knight named Rostam. For reasons unknown, the maiden decides to study abroad at Sumeru Academia. Before parting, Rostam gives her a Hydro timepiece as a gift. Soon after, the cataclysm breaks out and the world becomes a dumpster fire. Venti calls upon Dvorin to defend Mondstadt, and during the whole process, Rostam loses his life. Eventually, the maiden returns and realizes that her lover had fallen in battle due to a conflict between Khaenri'ah and the gods. The maiden becomes furious and begins to harbor resentment towards the gods, essentially being super pissed off, and decides to burn everything in this world that seems unjust as the Crimson Witch. Later, she is tracked down by Piero, the first Harbinger, and is recruited into the ranks of the Fatui, receiving the gift of Cryo from the Tsaritsa. Now, because this is MiHoYo, nowhere within these items give a direct call out to the name La Signora. So are there any evidence between her and the Crimson Witch? There are 3 points we can use to make this correlation. First, the interaction between Signora and Venti. Second, the original inspiration used to create her character. And finally, the obvious transformation seen in patch 2.1. So let's go back in time for a moment. At the end of the Arc Conquest in Mondstadt, we get to see an interaction between Signora and Venti. The dialogue shared between these two characters seems to signify that they've known each other for a while. Signora calling Venti weak, and after Venti's response, she slaps him across the face and literally soccer kicks him even while he was already in a fetal position. With this interaction, it becomes clear that Signora literally hates Venti's guts, mirroring the description from the Elegy for the End, noting that the maiden now hates being associated with the wind. To further dive into why Signora is related to the Crimson Witch, we need a small history lesson, a trait that persists to all the Harbingers of the Fatui. Commedia Dell'arte is a street theater of comedy originating from Italy in the 16th century. Within this performance, many characters were depicted to show the behavior of society. Fatui Harbingers getting their names from these masked characters, and La Signora, no exception. But interestingly, instead of a single character, the inspiration of her design comes from 3 different character archetypes, which isn't surprising since Genshin Impact is a fictional world full of intertwined references. The name La Signora is taken from a female variant of Il Capitano. Her personality is associated with Columbina, a cunning, financially adept, and highly intellectual character. And the story is taken from the witch. The witch's mask is often represented in a white color, depicting the moon. And in Commedia Dell'arte, the masks are the essence of the characters. Although Signora doesn't have a white mask, her identity as a character is represented by her white dress, as noted within the Pale Flames artifacts. As I mentioned in my previous video, the moon is closely tied to the existence of Venti. Signora's involvement in the past signifies her connection to the moon as well. Mondstadt being the moon city, and Liyue translated from Jade Moon. This may sound like a reach, but the representation of the witch goes further. The witch is known to be very intellectual, knowing multiple languages as well as dialects, perhaps a nod towards the maiden's time in Sumeru Academia. Also in Commedia Dell'arte, the witch often moves about in a figure 8 patterns. This is to signify that the witch is related to nature and its elements, specifically that of air, fire, earth and water. Air obviously representing Mondstadt, fire for her Crimson Witch powers, earth related to Liyue, and water being the Hydro timepiece that the maiden received from Rostam. With these correlations, I would theorize that Signora's relationship to the Crimson Witch is not a simple coincidence. On top of that, her transformation in patch 2.1 makes it kinda obvious. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I believe that this transformation foreshadows the end of Signora, if not literally, at least figuratively. If we take a closer look into her transformation, we can notice a very deliberate aesthetic choice made by MiHoYo. From Signora's emblem of the Fatui, and even in her transformation, we can notice that she resembles a moth. More specifically, an Exilia putris, a flame moth. This aesthetic choice of the flame moth for Signora literally explains everything about her character and even her possible death. In the real world, a moth uses the moonlight as a source of direction. That was until the invention of artificial lights. Because they used light as a source of direction, the inclusion of the artificial lights ended up confusing them. They became lost and conflicted, and their obsession to light causing their own demise. In a simple analogy, the beginning of the maiden's story in Mondstadt mirrors the moth using the moon as the initial source of guidance. Khaenri'ah's technological advancements will be represented as humanity's invention of artificial light. These advancements causes the cataclysm and the death of Rostam. In confusion, the maiden now has a new source of guidance in her life. She begins her obsession for vengeance and, like the moth to a flame, becomes the Crimson Witch, a decision that could end up being a fatal one. Now, this isn't the only red flag for Signora. As I mentioned earlier, the association with the witch and the natural elements only encompasses air, fire, earth, and water. All of which has been checked off already through Signora's story in the game. Air signaling her time in Mondstadt as a maiden. Fire tied with her being a Crimson Witch. Earth associated with her collaboration with Zhongli and Liyue, and water representing the Hydro timepiece received from Rostam, which we now know as the Witch's End Time artifact. The beginning and the end of her love, and perhaps even the beginning and the end of the Crimson Witch. Now, these correlations are great and all, but there's a question that needs to be answered. What about Inazuma? Why is she here now? To answer this question, we need to look at the bigger picture involving the entirety of the MiHoYo universe. If you play Honkai Impact 3, you probably already noticed the Flame Moth or the Fire Moth. Inside Honkai Impact 3, there's an organization known as the Fire Moth. Their goal was to defeat the Honkai, an entity that was threatening humanity. Within this organization, there was a scientist known as Dr. May, the reflection of Raiden May, and obviously a nod towards Raiden Shogun herself. Without getting too much into detail, the basic idea is that the Fire Moth disbanded alongside the death of Dr. May after their final war. Even though this is purely speculation, the final stop for Fire Moth, or in this case, Signora, could coincide with the end of the story of Raiden Shogun. Now, whether this is true or not, we'll eventually find out, but personally, whether Signora's death is literal or figurative, it would suck and I wouldn't like it. But if I learned anything from MiHoYo, they can kill off a character in 4 chapters while keeping them inside the game as a boss to fight to farm materials from. I hope I'm wrong. After all, this is just a theory. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like and consider subscribing for more future content on this channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.